Tommy Shepherd to move the motion. Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First time negotiating these, actually. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. This has been a while that we've been waiting for a third-party opposition day, so I'm delighted that today we get to set the agenda. And the timing of this debate could not be more apposite. On the 6th of May, Scotland goes to the polls. There will be a general election to the Scottish Parliament, and the consequences of the outcome of that election could be profound, both for Scotland and indeed for the rest of the United Kingdom. So it is fitting that this Parliament gets an opportunity, perhaps the last opportunity, to debate what it thinks of that before the campaign starts, indeed before the election actually takes place. I hope that today we can have a thoughtful and considered discussion about the political principles that will infuse that campaign and perhaps leave behind some of the more intemperate remarks which are often a hallmark of the campaign itself. In order to understand what is happening in Scotland at the present time, we need to first start with two facts. The first is that Scotland is not a region of a unitary state seeking secession from it. It is, in fact, a country that has been in existence for many centuries. And indeed, it is a nation which, by voluntary association, is part of a multinational state that we call the United Kingdom. The second fact is that in determining how that consent should be given, the people of Scotland are sovereign ultimately in making that decision. Now that claim to be sovereign, has been around for, well, at least 8 centuries, but in the modern era, it was codified in 1989 by the Scottish Constitutional Convention in a document called the Claim of Right for Scotland, which asserted that the people of Scotland have the right to determine the form of government best suited to their needs. Now, for a while, that claim, which underpinned the 20 years of policy and argument that was to follow, that claim was relatively uncontroversial. In fact, even in 2014, the Scottish Conservative Party issued a statement saying that whilst it didn't think the people of Scotland should vote for independence, they very much endorsed and agreed with their right to do so. Indeed, on the 18th of September 2014, the claim was put into practice, and there was a living experience of that right being exercised in the referendum on whether Scotland should become an independent country or not. Indeed, even after the referendum, in 2016, the Smith Commission noted that nothing in its report would preclude the people of Scotland voting to become an independent country in the future, and indeed, as late as 2018, which seems only a blink of an eye away, in this chamber we had a discussion on the claim of right where this Parliament and this House also reaffirmed its commitment to the principle. Now, I remember that debate, and I remember in particular the member for Edinburgh South's contribution, where he felt frustrated and aggrieved because his position was that whilst he agreed with the claim of right and supported it, he thought my party was acting in bad faith because the claim of right had been exercised at the referendum and we did not respect the result and the judgment of the people of Scotland in exercising their self-determination to remain in the United Kingdom. In fact, that is not true. We do very much respect the decision that was taken on the 18th of December 2014. And indeed, had it not been for the will of the people to do otherwise, that might have been the end of the matter for a very considerable period of time. But the fact is that it wasn't. And the claim of right is not something that can exist on the day of the referendum and then cease to exist the day after. If it is a right, then it must exist for all time. It does not have a self-destruct mechanism within it. It is not something that can be invalidated simply by its exercise. I have an embarrassment of riches. I will take the gentleman on the back bench and then come to you, sir.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. I wonder if, while he's recalling all of these different examples where people have discussed the claim of right, if he remembers in the 2014 referendum when the leader of his party said that it was a once-in-a-generation referendum.
Well, all good things come to those who wait, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure you I will be dealing with the once-in-a-generation tagline later in my speech. So predictable. The question, if we talk about referenda and whether or not referenda should take place, the question will arise, who should make the decision? And if we believe in the will of the Scottish people to choose their own destiny, then the answer to that can only be that it should be the people of Scotland themselves who take a decision on whether or not they have another referendum. Now, I accept that there needs to be a debate about how do you gauge the opinion of the people of Scotland, by what democratic mechanism can they express their view. Well, in democratic societies, we quite often do that by using the electoral process and the process of voting. And in 2016, that is exactly what happened. My party went to the election in 2016, not, Mr. Speaker, saying there must be another referendum and we disrespect the decision that was taken 18 months forward, but we went to the polls saying it looks like things are beginning to happen in the UK which will change the whole nature of the options available to people, and there may be circumstances in which it would be legitimate and proper to go forward and reconsider that question again in a second referendum. That was the mandate that we were given by the people of Scotland in 2016. Now, that was 6 weeks before the Brexit vote in the UK, and no one could have anticipated what was going to unfurl in the years after that May 2016 general election in Scotland. What happened was that people in England voted by a small majority to leave the European Union, and in Scotland by a much larger majority to stay in the European Union. Overall, the vote was such that there was a narrow majority to leave, and the British government began the process, the tortuous process, of extricating the United Kingdom from the European Union. A process made all the more difficult and painful, I believe, by the decision of the government not to try and accommodate any of the wishes of the people on the losing side of the argument, and to seek the maximum possible dissociation from the European Union. And that is what happened, and we remember the agonising twists and turns in that process. And as 2018 moved into 2019 and we watched this process unfold, two things became quite clear, Mr. Speaker. The first is that the opinion of the people of Scotland in this matter was to be completely disregarded. And unlike in other parts of the United Kingdom, where there was an attempt to try and make the decision that was being implemented fit the aspirations of the people who lived there, there was no such attempt in Scotland. Certainly, I'll take it.
But the fact remains that Brexit has happened, so an independent Scotland would have to apply to join the EU, leaving aside whether it would be wise for Scotland to replace a union with a country which is right next door to it, with a union with a country or a body which is hundreds of miles away. Why do you think that Spain, with its problems of Catalonia, would ever facilitate Scotland rejoining the EU?
That's not the subject of today's debate, but it only takes a cursory reading of statements from European premiers to see that their mood has completely changed in terms of this debate, and they would welcome, many of them with open arms, a self-governing Scotland into the European Union. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, if you don't mind me saying so, because we haven't yet had the ability to take that decision. So, the Brexit process unfolded. Two things became clear. One was that Scotland's views would be disregarded, but an even more worrying thing was emerging as well, because we saw the British government begin to put in place mechanisms that would replace the jurisdiction of the European Union, which in themselves were centralising political power in this country and reducing the capacity and the competence of the devolved administrations in Holyrood and indeed in Cardiff. So it became clear by the end of 2019 that these two things were making a fundamentally different terrain on which the future of the United Kingdom and the future of Scotland within it should be judged. And it was the determination of the Scottish Parliament by a resolution at that time that the conditions set in the mandate of 2016 had indeed been met, and that mandate should now be discharged. And therefore, the Scottish Parliament voted and applied to the British government for a Section 30 order to begin the process of having a further referendum. The response by the Prime Minister was fast and furious, and he dismissed it out of hand. And we were about, Mr. Speaker, to get into an argument about this when the world literally turned upside down, and a small microbe brought humanity almost to its knees. And as COVID-19 raced across the globe and brought many parts of our economy and society to its knees and ground to a halt, the Scottish Government, rightly in my view, took the decision to shelve any preparations or any plans it would have for a further referendum until that matter was dealt with. Had that not happened, had the pandemic not happened, we might well be having a very different discussion here today. But we are where we are, and where we are, Mr. Speaker, is 51 days away from the Scottish general election, at which the existing mandate will expire. And that is why, at that election, my party and others will be seeking a new, fresh mandate from the Scottish people in order to assert their right to choose whether or not they wish to remain in a post-Brexit Britain, or whether Scotland's fortunes are better served by having a choice in becoming a self-governing, independent European country. Now, that is what will be at stake in the 2021 election. And unlike 2016, the mandate we seek will not be conditional or have qualifications or be reliant on things that may or may not happen. It will be unconditional, without qualification, and it will be front and centre on page 1 of our manifesto. And I think it's a racing certainty, they can tell me if I'm wrong, I think it's a racing certainty that the inverse proposition will be front and centre in the Conservative manifesto as well. So we can be sure of one thing, and that is that there will be a full and frank debate about this question, and a vote will be taken on May the 6th, 2021. I'll give it.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman giving way. He obviously said page 1 will refer to independence. I wonder if page 2 will go back to what Nicola Sturgeon referred to as the focal point for her premiership, which was education, and whether or not we could have the OECD's review into the curriculum for excellence before the May elections rather than after, so the people of Scotland have on record the Scottish National Party's record on education since they took over in 2007.
I am more than happy that the record of the Scottish Government should be judged by the people on May the 6th as well. Independence and the referendum is not the only thing we shall be voting on. But that is a government, an SNP government that's been in power now for 14 years. And what it does seems to go down rather well with the people of Scotland. And I very much look forward to their judgment on May the 6th on that question. If you don't mind, I think I'm... Okay, quickly, and then I'll have to make some progress.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. He's seeking a new mandate. The honourable member's party is seeking a new mandate on the 6th of May. Therefore, if they don't get the majority that they're seeking, will he therefore rule out that the SNP won't try again to seek to provide a divisive second referendum?
Mr. Speaker, everything we do is subject to the will of and endorsement by the people of Scotland. So obviously, if they don't want to take a particular course of action that we're recommending, that is what will not happen. And if the Conservatives win on May the 6th, I accept there will not be a referendum. I hope they will accept that if we win, there will be, and it will be legitimate for that to happen. Because we need to consider, I'm going to make some progress if you don't mind. We need to consider what this House, what this Chamber's response would be to that likely outcome. I don't take anything for granted. The campaign hasn't started, not a single vote has been cast, and I don't take anyone's vote for granted. We will be arguing right till 10 o'clock on polling day on this. But I think people will want to know what would be the reaction of this Parliament here in Westminster if they were to take a decision saying they wanted to have that choice again. And that is why I think we need to be very careful in this campaign about the language that is used by different opponents in this process. Because the way it's described will in itself condition how people vote on May the 6th. And I say that the only legitimate and proper and democratic response that could be made is to say, we disagree with the decision you've taken, but we respect your right to take it, and the British government will therefore cooperate with the Scottish government in trying to deliver on the wishes of the people freely and democratically expressed at the ballot box. That would be the reaction I would hope to see. The only possible other responses are to say either that process of the election is not a sufficient democratic event to allow the choice of the people to be gauged, and therefore we won't accept it, in which case those making that argument have to say what would be the mechanism by which people can resolve to go forward in this matter, or they have to say, well, it doesn't matter what the result was because we don't respect that that's a decision for you to make. And in doing that, that would be rejecting the claim of right, that would be rejecting the right of people in Scotland to make a choice, and it would take us into uncharted territory, because that would move the United Kingdom from being a multinational state built on the cooperation and consent of the people who live in its component parts to being a state based on coercion of people throughout its borders in order to comply with things, even if they disagree with it. And that would be a completely different territory to go to. I'm going to make this the last one because I'm going to have to get on.
Gentleman for giving way, and I'm quite surprised that actually he hasn't mentioned independent polls, because he used to like to do that, especially when today shows that 57% of people would vote against separation. Could he just elaborate to this House why he thinks and what he attributes the change of mind from the Scottish people to?
I didn't mention polls because I would have thought it's too obvious, isn't it? I mean, we had 22 polls in a row that gave a majority support for independence. So I think the poll that matters is the one that takes place on the 6th of May, and I think all of us can agree on that. Mr. Speaker, in moving on, I want to deal with some of the themes that are going to come up in this campaign. And this is where I will enjoin some of the comments and questions that were made in earlier interventions. So the first, let me deal with this question of once in a generation, this mantra. The Prime Minister has repeated this ad nauseum over the last 12 months. And sometimes, in some of the iterations in which he speaks, you would think that those words were on the ballot paper on the 18th of September 2014. I accept that the phrase once in a generation was part of the debate, but let us at least be honest with each other about the context in which that was said. It was said invariably by those who were proposing a yes vote for independence as a caution to their supporters that they might not get another chance. It was not made as a promise or qualification to those who opposed independence that it was going to go away forever. And the truth is, we've already dealt with who should decide whether there's another referendum. But the truth is this, and I fully accept this, that had September the 18th, 2014 resulted in a decisive result, and had circumstances not changed, then that might well have been the end of it. But things did change. Opinion did change. And it is for the people of Scotland now to make this determination. The other thing I want to raise, I think I've got to move on. I'm not sure. Am I okay taking some more?
It's up to you.
I'm aiming for a time limit, Mr. Speaker. Yes, please.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. He took his time about deciding on it, but nevertheless, look, Mr. Speaker, this is all well and good, the Honourable Gentleman trying to explain away this phrase, once in a generation. Here's the point. It wasn't us that said it. It wasn't even the Tories that said it. It was the SNP that said it.
And I hope you'll do the courtesy of listening to what I say and what I said earlier when I made it plain the context in which it was said. It was said as a warning to those who supported independence, not as a promise to those who didn't. But actually, it's a moot question. It's a moot question because it's not for the Prime Minister or the First Minister or me or you to decide on this question. It's for the people of Scotland to make the determination as to whether there should be another referendum, and to do that through the democratic mechanism of electing a parliament on a manifesto. That is the process with which we are engaged. Mr. Speaker, I've already heard the word separatist raised in intervention, so I also want to deal with this, because much of what we're going to hear in the coming months will be about the long arms of the union and how we mustn't turn our back. And this word separatist is used as a dysphemism to suggest that people like myself are somehow insular, self-serving, want to turn our backs on people of England, are not interested in cooperation, are not interested in working together across Britain. Mr. Speaker, it is a lie. It is simply a lie. Nothing could be further from the truth. Getting independence for Scotland is about Scotland having the political capacity to engage with others. It will be the means not of the separation of the Scottish people, but of their involvement across this island, across this continent, and indeed across the world. And also, Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the, in my final few moments, let me turn to the substance of the amendment. Because the amendment is quite interesting, isn't it? I talked earlier about there appeared to be a consensus around the idea of the claim of right. So a better amendment might have been to leave the existing text, which was drafted in an attempt not to divide the House, but to leave the existing text and then insert the word, however we believe that, now is not the time, or whatever. But instead, it doesn't do that. It deletes all of it, including the assertion of the claim of right. And I invite the Conservatives in this debate to make it clear whether or not they still do believe that in the final resolve it should be for the people of Scotland to determine their own constitutional future or not. I won't take an intervention because they'll be speaking very, very shortly. But the whole premise of this amendment is to say that it is impossible to consider these matters now because of the pandemic which we are all facing and because of the misery and concern that that has caused, and that it would be a distraction. Well, let's be entirely clear about this. No one, and I mean no one, is suggesting that we have a referendum campaign during the pandemic. We will have to have it. We will have to have it. I tell you now, no one is suggesting that. We will have to have that put behind us and be moving into a recovery phase before that can happen. I'm sorry. Quickly then.
Interested in what the honourable gentleman said, because his leader, the Right Honourable Member for Roscommon Chaber, has said an independence referendum could be held this year. The Scottish National Party have put aside £600,000 of party funds to fight a referendum campaign this year. Are they wrong, or is the honourable gentleman wrong?
If it's possible to have it later this year because the pandemic is over and we have moved beyond it, then I would welcome that. I don't speculate on whether it's the end of this year or the beginning of next year. The principle I'm advocating is that we will not be launching or fighting a referendum campaign whilst the pandemic is still extant and whilst we have the restrictions, the social restrictions on people that are mandated by the public health emergency. That is a fact. And I'll tell you for no other reason. I don't want to ask people in Scotland about their future through the medium of a computer screen. I want people to be engaged in this debate as friends and as strangers in workplaces, in pubs, in parks. I want them talking about this energised in the way that they were in 2014. And that is not possible by having some sort of mega Zoom meeting to try and conduct this debate. So yes, we will be having the referendum campaign once we have dealt with the pandemic and are moving into the recovery phase. But here's the final point. Because as we go into the recovery phase, everyone should understand this, that far from the debate about a referendum or independence being a diversion from dealing with the pandemic and recovering from it, far from that, the process by which we are governed and the type of country we build and develop post-COVID are intimately linked. They are two sides of the same coin. If we want to see in Scotland a sustainable, green, resilient economy which delivers for the communities of Scotland, then we will need the powers and capacity of independence to be able to marshal and direct the country's capital to that end. If we want to have a better society with a system of obligation and reward that is rooted in human decency and to see the eradication of poverty in Scotland, then the agency that comes with independence will be critical in delivering that end. And if we want to see Scotland play its full role in the world and take a seat at the top table of nations, where we can argue enlightened opinions, whether it comes from how we treat refugees in the world to how we eradicate nuclear weapons from our shores, then that will require the political capacity of independence. Sorry, I'm finishing. That will require the political capacity of independence. So, Mr. Speaker, these things are intimately linked. It's not a matter of do you postpone a discussion on whether you have an independence referendum in order till you get to the recovery phase. We know the mood music of the UK government. The Chancellor hasn't got a detailed plan yet, but we already know that he thinks the people who are going to pay for COVID should be the public services of the United Kingdom and those who work in them. And we are anticipating another austerity programme coming in the autumn. Well, the people of Scotland don't have to follow that lead. They have the opportunity on May the 6th to vote for the right to choose a better future. And after this long, tragic, miserable year of dealing with COVID-19, I think that provides hope on the horizon which people will respond to and people will vote for. And this House will need to get used to the idea.
The question is as on the order paper. I'm going to call Minister David Jewett to move the amendment